God real?
What happens when we die?
Does God really care about me?
Does prayer really work?
Why do bad things happen to good people?
You were God. What prayers would you listen to?
What happens after you die?
Jesus, I'm sorry about last night. Jesus, we both know that I tried. Jesus, feels like the world's in pieces. I'm sure you've got your reasons, but I've got my doubts. Yeah, Jesus, I've got my doubts. When everything that's right feels wrong, and all of my belief is gone, and the darkness in my heart is so strong, can you reach me here in the silence, singing these broken songs, looking for the light for so long, but the pain goes on and on and on. Can you reach me here in the silence? Jesus, what a week we've had. Jesus, has the world gone mad? Jesus, feels like the world's in pieces. I'm sure you've got your reasons, but I've got my doubts. Yeah, Jesus, I've got my doubts. Everything that's right feels wrong, and all of my belief feels gone, and the darkness in my heart is so strong. Can you reach me here in the silence, singing these broken songs? Been looking for the light for so long, but the pain goes on and on and on and on. Can you reach me here in the silence? Are you there? Do you care? Are you near me? 'Cause I'm scared and I'm weary. Are you there? Can you hear me? Are you there? Can you hear me? Do you care? Are you near me? 'Cause I'm scared and I'm weary. Are you there? Can you hear me? Not the thing that's right feels wrong, and all of my belief feels gone, and the darkness in my heart is so strong. Can you reach me here in this silence, singing these broken songs? Been looking for the light for so long, but the pain goes on and on and on and on. Can you reach me here in this silence, when everything that's right feels wrong, oh, and all of my belief feels gone, and the darkness in my heart is so strong? Can you reach me here in this silence, singing these broken songs? I've been looking
Jesus, I have my doubts. Do you even care? Do you know I'm here? This song asks so many questions that I think are so true to our souls that we would love to ask sometimes, but sometimes we're scared to ask, or we wonder, can we even ask those questions? And as I was doing some research for our time together today, I found out some interesting statistics that I thought I should share with you. Did you know the average young toddler around the age of 4 will typically ask between 300 and 350 questions a day? And all the parents are like, yes, they can, right? And they usually start with the word why or mom, right? I thought that was interesting, 300 questions a day. But see, they do this to try to make sense of the world around them. They're curious. They want to know why and why this happens and why that happens. The only thing I wish is that they would actually listen to the answer, right? Because typically it's just the same questions over and over on a daily repeat. But I think there's something about the questions that they ask. And I think it's something important for us to learn even as we become adults, because as we grow up into our adult life, generally the questions typically fall then between 25 and 30 questions a day. So we go from 300 questions to 30 questions as we get older. And I found that to be fascinating, right? There's something about when we're young, we're curious. There's something we're looking, we're exploring, we're seeking. And as we get older, we typically just take life as it happens. We stop asking good questions. And we stop wondering, we stop being curious. And a lot of times we miss out on the things and the answers that God and others could give us if we simply remembered what it meant to ask questions. And for some reason, we think when we look into our faith or show up at church or begin to ask God questions that we can't be curious, that there's something about our faith that we can't question our faith or question God. And that's simply not true. We're going to learn some things over the next few weeks together that are going to help us wrestle with these questions that all of us walk around with, thinking about or asking ourselves or wondering what could be the answer on the other side of our questions. And that's why we've decided to take the next few weeks as a church to talk about your big questions. And we're going to go through this series called My Big Questions together over the next few weeks, exploring what it means to look at these questions and to dive into them. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Trey. I'm one of the pastors here. And let me just say welcome. If this is your first time, especially with us, whether you're here in Mechanicsville, online, or Scottsdale, I know how awkward it can be to walk into a church or to come to a church or a new church for the first time. And so thank you for entrusting us today with that church experience. And I hope that somehow we help you along in your faith journey today as we look at these questions together. Now, we got these questions from a poll that we sent out to all of you asking, what are the questions you're thinking about right now? And I thank you for those who submitted questions. They were really good questions that we could spend all year talking about if we were to dive into each one. But what we did as a staff, we took those questions and we put them into various categories, and we're going to look at those categories over the next few weeks together to talk about what those questions could look like and how we can respond and what we can learn as we go into these questions together. Now, let me just say this up front. I do not pretend, or anybody else who's on staff or will speak during this series, do not pretend to have all the answers to your great life questions. And that's okay, because all of us are going to learn and discover together what God has to say about our big questions. And there are people that have been studying the questions we're going to look at for so many generations. They've done so much research and analysis on these questions, and a lot of them are still confused about what the answers to some of these questions are. And that's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at historical research. We're going to look at today's research. We're going to look at all these things and hopefully come to grips with some of these big questions that all of us have. But let me first just say this, because I want to make sure we're all on the same page as we start off our time together, is that it's okay to ask questions. And it's really okay to ask questions when it comes to our faith and while we're in church. So many of us grow and learn by asking great questions. If you ever consider yourself, how many of you guys like asking questions? Anybody like asking questions? Okay, there's a few of you. How many of you just like to take life as it comes? Anybody like that? See, I'm more in that category, right? So when I put this series together and we were talking as a staff, I was like, man, this series is good for those people, right? Those analytical people. I'm more on the feeler side of things. I kind of like, whatever happens, we'll figure it out. That's usually my phrase. We'll figure it out when we get there. But I have noticed that some of my biggest questions over the years have helped me grow in my faith and have helped me become the Christ follower that I am today. And so no matter where you find yourself or how big of questions you ask, we're all in good company today, no matter what our personalities will be. And the Bible is full of people who asked really good questions. Like the song said, these people in the Bible had their doubts. They were seeking to try to understand God while being a part of God's story. There's so many times where they're just flat out confused and they don't know what's happening or what's going on. There's so many people just like you and I who find themselves trying to understand God more while honestly trying to live this life the best that they can. And so, yes, your questions are okay. God is not turned off or dissatisfied because you have questions about your faith or about Him. What I hope is that we all discover that our questions, the more we seek, the more we ask, the more we research, the more we study together, the more it pushes us towards our relationship with God and helps us draw closer to Him in the midst of our questions. And so today, as we jump into our first big question, I think this is the one that honestly all of us, no matter who we are, wrestle with the most. It's a question that's been asked for so many people throughout so many generations. And famous author Lee Strobel did a study many years back, and he asked so many Americans, he said, hey, if you could ask God one question, and He would answer this question, what would it be? And this question was the number one asked question by so many people. And this is the question we're going to look at today. Why does God allow pain and suffering in the world? Why does God allow pain and suffering in the world? I think that's a question all of us, internally or externally, we wrestle with. And most of it goes along asking the question like this: why does bad things happen to good people, right? Or on the other side of it, why does good things happen to horrible people, right? Those are things that we want to ask, but maybe we're scared to ask, or maybe we don't want to know the answer to it, or maybe God just, forgot to push a button up in heaven one day and something good just happened to the wrong person. But what if there's more to it than that? I think the reason this top question is so popular by so many is because you and I experience so many things on this earth that we want to know why we're going through the things that we're going through. And as a pastor, this is a question I get asked more than any other question when it comes to people's lives and their stories. And one of the best examples of this that's found in the Bible, we're going to study today, is from a guy named Asaph. He's in the Old Testament of our Bible, about halfway through in the book of Psalms. He is kind of a prophet. He's known for being a poet and a songwriter. He's kind of like Grace and Chad. He's kind of like your old school worship leader, right? He was the guy leading the songs, doing that stuff, and he writes over 10 passages in the Bible, and he asks questions like you and I ask questions. And that's what I like about Asaph. He's very real and honest. And I want to look at what he writes because I think this question is what you and I often wonder when it comes to God. And I want you to see just how honest Asaph is. And imagine Grace or Chad up here about to play music, and this is what they tell you. It'd be pretty depressing, right? Let's look at this passage together. Psalm 73, verses 11 through 14. It says, what does God know, they ask. Does the Most High even know what's happening? Look at these wicked people enjoying a life of ease while their riches multiply. He continues by saying, did I keep my heart pure for nothing? Did I keep myself innocent for no reason? I get nothing but trouble all day long. Every morning brings me pain. Isn't that an interesting verse to think about? All these things bringing pain and agony and stress and all that stuff. Did I keep my heart pure for nothing, God? He's basically asking God, why do good things keep happening to these really bad people? And why do people like me suffer and go through hard times? God, I thought you were looking out for me. God, I thought you cared about me. but yet all I seem to experience is trouble and pain. He's wondering, God, why me? God, why am I going through this? And that's often the question we ask when we're going through things. And even people that don't believe in God, when trouble hits or, suffering happens, that's the question they start to ask because they're like, okay, somebody must be doing this to me. What's happening in my life that this is taking place? Does God even know what's happening? Does God even care? And so what I would like to do is take our next few moments and explore Asaph's question, but also explore our question. Why does pain and suffering happen? And why does God allow it to happen? And I want to take two different approaches. First one I want to take is through study and research, and as far as looking back at the Bible, what does it have to say about why this happens? And I've read so many great books this week, but there is one that I highly recommend because I know there's some of you that this answer isn't going to be enough to satisfy you because this is a big question for us to study together today. And in the 30 minutes that I have with you, we're not going to be able to cover all of it. But if you're looking for a great read, if you're suffering or going through something, this book by Philip Yancey, Where is God When It Hurts? Fantastic read. The studies that he does, the research that he does, and the stories that are in this book are phenomenal. So if you're looking for a great read when you leave church today, make sure to grab this on Amazon. A great kind of next step to talk through what we're going to talk about today. But I want to give you kind of the big picture highlights of what Philip goes through in this book and what others have said about what it means to experience suffering and pain and all of that we go through on this earth. And the best thing that people experience, and I heard this term when I was going through seminary, and it's a term that we see from the very beginning of the Bible. And this term is known as free will. Free will simply means that God gives you and I the ability to choose. When he created humans, he didn't want us to be rocks or robots that just kind of follow him, do what he tells us to do. God wanted to give us free will. He wanted to give us a choice. Now, when we have choice, the good thing about that is wow, we have so much freedom, right? We have the freedom. God gave us the ability to choose. The problem with choice is that it also gives us the possibility for pain. It also gives us the possibility to not choose God, to choose our own way. And what we see in the very beginning of Scripture was the first kind of humans that were placed on the earth, Adam and Eve. They were walking, they were in paradise, everything was great. Well, yet they chose a wrong choice. They chose to rebel against God, and they chose their own way. Now, since we are descendants of them so many thousands of years later, we end up falling in the same traps as well. While we love that God gives us free will, we love that we have the choice, we find ourselves in a part where we choose other things besides God all of the time. And because we did that back then and because we do that now, it creates for us all kinds of possibilities for pain and suffering and choices that we make and things that we do, but also things that are done to us. The world is full of evil because God chose love. Because you can't have love without choice. If God just told us, hey, love me, there would be no choice in that, right? But God gave us the option and the ability to choose him and to love him with our lives or to not choose him and to do our own thing. And we've seen that since the very beginning of time, but we also see it every single day. And this is where we see a thing called sin enter the world. When we rebelled against God, when we chose our own way, sin is what happens when we choose something other than God, when we choose our own way. And because of sin entering the world, it allowed the possibility for all sorts of evil and suffering and pain to exist in our world that you and I typically we don't like. And we wonder why it exists. But the thing is, that has to exist for us to experience the good. We don't know how good God is if we didn't experience how bad things are. And that's why God allows it to happen. He gives us the freedom to choose. And the thing is that you and I, we've abused that freedom for a long time. And that's what happens when we choose to go against God. I love how the book shares it. It says, pain and suffering multiplied on earth as a consequence of the abuse of human freedom. And that's what happens, right? When we chose our own way, when we allowed evil to come into our lives and to exist in our world. But even Jesus, when he walked around on earth, as he saw the different things that were wrong with the world when he was on the earth, he even told us as he wrestled with what he saw, because many of us, we wrestle with, okay, there's the sovereignty of God, right? Like God is all-knowing, suffering should not exist, but then we see the suffering of the world. So how is a sovereign God and suffering, how does that coexist? And here's what Jesus tells us in John 16:33 about what that looks like in our lives. He said, I told you these things so that in me you may have peace. So in God, in Jesus, we have peace. There's this difference that we experience. But he said, in this world, you will have what? You will have trouble. That's actually a promise from the Bible for our lives. Aren't you glad you have that one? We don't see that one like on the back of a car sticker or like tattooed on your arm, right? Like, in this world, I will have trouble. Yes, this is awesome. Thanks, God. But then he says this, but take heart, for I have overcome the world. So even Jesus tells us, as he's roaming the earth, Son of God in human form, you will have trouble. You will have pain. You will have suffering. But don't worry, because I've done something that's going to help every single one of us. I have overcome the world. So it's promised from Jesus himself that we're going to have trouble, face issues, face circumstances that are not enjoyable. But there is something that you and I can do during those times to make it possible for us to endure no matter what circumstance we may face. And before I get there, lastly, I want to tell you this, because when we often ask the question, why do bad things happen to good people? We often think that we're those good people, right? That we're great, like we have it all together. God, why would you allow this horrible thing to happen to perfect me? But the truth is, none of us are perfect. And if you think you're perfect, you're definitely not perfect, right? Because all of us mess up. All of us fall short of God's standard. And the only reason we think we are good is because we compare ourselves to somebody really bad, right? We're like, okay, I'm not as bad as that person, so God, I'm pretty good. Like, you shouldn't allow anything bad to happen to me. Like, have you seen what they're doing over there? That's really sketchy, right? Like, I'm doing pretty good compared to them. But the truth is, all of us aren't perfect. All of us make bad decisions. All of us, just like Adam and Eve did, we rebel against God. We try to choose our own way, and it usually doesn't go well. The writer of Romans, chapter 3, tells us this in the Bible about ourselves. He said, for all, everybody say all, just so you know that's you, okay? For all have sinned, every single one of you have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And so, why does bad things happen to good people? The truth is, there's only one bad thing that happened to one good person, and that was Jesus himself. Jesus was the only good person that actually walked on this earth. He lived a perfect, sinless life, and he chose to do that, to come to earth, to demonstrate his love, to show us a different way. And that's the way we're going to look at here in just a moment. But for all of us, we've all fallen short. So all of us are bad people, and bad things happen to us while we're here on this earth. And a lot of it is outside of our control. But Jesus lived a perfect, sinless life, and he volunteered for it, which means he is ultimately the one that did something good for those who are bad. God actually suffered for us. He went through pain. He went through suffering. He went through agony, so to give us a better way through our bad choices. Now, that's the textbook answer. There's another side of this answer that I think you and I, the reason we write these questions down is because we often ask God, why is this happening to me? And most of the questions that were submitted to us were, God, why am I going through this medical diagnosis? God, why am I going through this divorce? God, why did that person do that to me? God, do you even see me in what I'm going through right now? God, why would you take that person from me? And those questions, they hit home, don't they? Because all of us have been through something that caused some sort of pain or suffering in our lives? And that answer may help some of you reconcile some of that. But honestly, I know there are many of you that are going through so many hard things, have specific questions, doubts, and concerns of why. And to be honest with you, I don't know why you're going through what you're going through right now. And I wish I had a better answer. I don't know why you're going through the suffering, the pain, the struggle that you are going through. But God is the only one who knows everything and is involved in everything to know the reason and to know the why of every situation. And on this side of heaven, there will simply be things that you and I can't understand because guess what? We're not God. We're not all-knowing. He's the only one who is. And literally this week, I had to walk with people through horrible circumstances as a pastor. And they were asking the questions that you all are asking. I was walking with a mom this week who experienced another death in her family. She had lost both her sons in the span of a few years. And literally, we're at the funeral home and we go out to the graveside and literally listening to her weep in agony over to the two children that she had lost and had to bury them before she passed. What a horrible thing for someone to have to go through, right? Then I had lunch with a guy this week who got a horrible doctor's report and is going through another round of cancer after he had already defeated it once. And we're sitting there talking at lunch, and he's one of our small group leaders. I mean, he's an incredible guy. And I'm listening to his story and going, man, out of anybody, why him, right? And that's the questions we normally ask when things are not going well. And we wonder, God, where are you? God, do you care? And I've heard it explained so many ways. I've heard that the ripple effect, like we don't understand what this part of life affects that part of life, and we only see sort of the story, the snapshot where God sees the whole picture. And I get that. I understand that, but then it still leaves us going, well, but why did this happen to me, God? And we learn so much in these moments. We learn about ourselves. We learn about our relationship with God. We learn about trusting God more and relying on him and his strength, and all that's good. But how do we cope with the pain and the suffering when it does come into our lives? When these things become our things, and these things are hard to handle. The truth is, like I said, none of us know why those things happen. But instead of asking why those things happen, I want to give you another question to ask. Is what do we do when these things do come into our lives? What do we do with them? And how could God help us in the midst of our pain and suffering? And this is what the writer of Hebrews tells us, because honestly, if there's anybody who can relate to our pain and suffering, it's God. We often think and blame God for those things that happen, but the scriptures tell us a different story. Listen to this, the writer says. He says, since we have a great high priest, being Jesus, who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we possess. And then tells us this, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. And so if that's Jesus, here's what he tells us to do about it. He said, let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to what? To help us in our time of need. And so the scriptures remind us that, yeah, we're going to go through trouble. We're going to go through pain. We're going to go through suffering on this earth. And we may not understand the why. But we do have a God that is able to empathize with our weaknesses and our struggles. That he went through one of the gruesome death that anyone could have ever experienced. He went through so much pain, so much suffering, because he cared about every single one of us and wanted to make us right with God. And so when we go through pain, when we go through struggle, when we go through hardships that we cannot understand, we can go to a God who does understand, who does love us and care for us. And the scriptures teach us that we can find mercy and grace in our time of need. We have a God who's been through it all. And so for you and I, instead of asking God, why did this happen? We go, God, what can you do with what's happening right now? And when we ask that question, I think that's when we begin to find out who God really is. Today. And the writer John puts it this way. He says, as he went along, he saw a blind man from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Like, God, why is this happening? Jesus, you can fix this, right? You can do something about this. And then here's what he says. Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus. But this happened so that the work of God may be displayed in his life. Now, that's an answer you and I really don't like, do we? Because we want Jesus to answer the why. Jesus, why did this happen? Fix it. Do something about it. And he simply says, nobody sinned. This isn't anyone's problem. This is a struggle that this man is carrying, and God can work good in it. Jesus didn't answer the why, but he did shut down some bad ways of thinking when it comes to pain and suffering in our lives. Because so many people think, oh, am I being punished by God because this is happening? Or did God have some plan that allow these horrific events to happen in my life? Or why is God doing this to me? Does he have it out for me? Does he hate me? And the truth is that God loves you. God cares about you. And that's why Jesus came and suffered the way that he did, so that he could make you right with God no matter what bad things that you experience on this earth that you do or that are done to you. And that we find that God can still work in the midst of our pain and suffering. God can work everything for our good. His goal is to continue to make us more and more like Jesus every day. See, Jesus went through loneliness. Jesus went through betrayal by those closest to him. Jesus went through suffering. Jesus went through sadness. All these on his time here on earth. And he promises during our weakest moments to be there for us, to strengthen us. And he promises us to be there with us every step of the way to know that we are never alone. Jackie Hill Perry said it this way. I love this. She said, we view God not through the lens of our circumstances. We view God through the lens of the cross. And so we don't say, God, why did this happen to me? Look at all the bad. We view God through the lens of the cross that went through suffering, pain, agony, all so that we could be made right with him, so that we know that we have a God who cares about us in the midst of our pain and our struggles. And so that when we go through suffering, when we go through things we don't understand, and we often ask, why God? We can also know that God faced the same kind of suffering, and he cares and he's there with us. And you know what I've found in the midst of some of my life's challenging moments is that that's the moments where I lean on God the most. It's where I can hear God clearest the most sometimes. Popular writer C.S. Lewis said it this way. I love this quote. He says, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It's his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. And so when we go through struggles, when we go through pain, it's those moments that we can listen to God and know he's there for us. And I love this quote because it reminds me that in our deepest pains, God is still there. And he's still there with you, and he's still there with me no matter what we may be facing today. And like I said, to be honest with you, with your particular situation, I do not know why you're going through it. And I am so sorry that you're experiencing that here on this earth. Those moments are no fun for any of us to go through. Whatever that relationship struggle may be, whatever addiction you continue to fight, whatever depression you continue to walk through, whatever doctor report scares you around the corner, that heavy heart, whatever. I have learned that though we may not understand all of these struggles, we may not know what they mean, but that God does care for us in the midst of our pain and suffering. You can be real with him. You can be honest with him. You can be mad at him. You can tell him how you really feel. He can handle all your frustrations and your pain. People all throughout history and all throughout our biblical text have been honest and real before God to tell them how they felt in the midst of life's toughest circumstances. But I hope that we can all learn one thing today when it comes to this question. And I hope that you remember this statement no matter what you walk through in the days ahead or maybe what you're walking through right now is this, is that even though bad things happen, God is still good and can work good in any situation. Even though bad things happen, in this world we will have trouble, but God is still good and he can work good in any situation that we face. And so I don't know what situation you're facing right now, but I hope that you can cling to that promise that God is with you every step of the way. But the cool thing is, there is a place and there is a time where none of these things, none of these pains and sorrows and sufferings will exist. And that's the promise of our eternity one day. God did get it right. We just get to experience it on the other side of the grave. He does make due on his promise that we won't have to face any of these troubles any longer. That's why he created a heavenly eternity for us to experience one day where there is no more pain, there is no more suffering. And that's the hope that we secure ourselves to, that while we do go through hard things here on this earth that we don't like and we don't understand, the promise that heaven one day is greater than anything that we'll experience here on this earth is the anchor we cling to. And that's why Jesus came and suffered the way he did, so that you and I would know that we have a place there one day with him. This is what the end of the Bible, as we get to the end, tells us about that day and time when we do enter that eternity. Revelation 21, 3-4 says, they will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the older of things has passed away. And I love that because it reminds us that there's a greater day ahead for you and I to experience. And I once saw this example that's always stuck with me to help keep me grounded and focused on eternity and not get so caught up here on this earth. It looks something like this. I don't know if you've ever seen this example before, but you and I, when we go through pain, when we go through suffering, we go through struggles, it can seem like eternity, right? It can seem like, is this ever going to end? But the truth is, eternity is forever. It goes on forever, so long. And so if you compare our lives to eternity, look how short life really is here on this earth. This is the portion of life that you and I live right now here on earth. And yeah, it's hard. We go through things that we don't understand, and we go, God, why am I going through this right now? God, do you see me? Do you care? Do you love me? And he said, listen, I sent my son to pay for all of that. So yeah, you're going to go through things you don't understand. Yeah, life does get hard, but trust me, this is just a piece of the life that you will live. If you put your faith and trust in me, there's a greater home in heaven waiting for you one day where none of that will exist. And all you have to do is just say yes to Jesus. And look what happens. Our eternity from ever and ever and ever, there is no more pain. There is no more suffering. God does make due on his promise. And that while this little time here on this earth may be hard, we have an eternity of no more pain and suffering and sorrow to look forward to, where we'll be in our presence of our Savior and he makes everything right. And I know it's hard here on this earth to go through the things that we go through. But go back to the verse. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, for I have overcome the world and given you a much better future, a much better eternity that goes on and on forever and ever. And when you're with me, none of that will exist. And that's the future and the hope that we cling to in our relationship with God. And so I don't know why you're going through what you're going through right now. I wish I could. I wish I could make it just go away. I can't. But I can tell you of a God who loves and cares for you in the midst of whatever you're going through and promises you a better hope and future for the days to come if you place your faith and trust in him. And so our job here on this earth is to take our doubts, take our questions, take our struggles, take our pain and our mess, and come to God and say, God, I need you. God, you've been through this. You know this. God, I'm scared. God, I don't know what to do. God, I don't know what the days ahead look like. God, I don't know why this is happening to me, but I choose to trust you in the midst of it. And when we can be that real, that honest before God, I think that's when we experience his peace the most. We find a God who's there to comfort us and love us and there for us, no matter what we may face here on this earth. And so for a moment, what I want us to do is I want you to listen to this song. One of our music directors, Chad, he sent me this song not too long ago. And as I listened to this song, it just reminded me of what we go through here on this earth. And I want you to listen to it, and hopefully it helps you in whatever you may be struggling with today to understand who God is in the midst of whatever pain you may be facing today.
Sometimes marriages don't work. Sometimes babies die. Sometimes we have turns and relapse, and you're left just asking why. For all the prayers that I've prayed, I still wonder if he's real. And if he is, how does he choose who he does and doesn't leave? I've tried to run from Jesus, I've started holy wars, and I've tried the patient waiting and kicking down the doors. I've cursed your name in anger with my fist raised to the sky, but all you've ever been is kind. I've burned my share of bridges. I learned to tuck my tail and run. Watch the wreckage from the review of the crooked things I've done. And I know that he forgives me, but it's hard to forgive myself. I can't help but think that amazing grace is made for everybody else. And I've tried to run from Jesus, I've started holy wars, and I've tried the patient waiting and kicking down the doors. I've cursed your name in anger with my fist raised to the sky, but in return all he's ever been is kind. All he's ever been is kind. I wasn't there that day, but when I look up at the cross, I see the darkest day in history. I guess that's what kindness cost. And I've tried to run from Jesus, I've started home. I've tried the patient waiting and kicking down the doors. He knows I don't deserve it, but he's never changed his mind. All he's ever been is kind, and all he's ever been is kind.
All he's ever been was kind. In the midst of all that we face, he faced it too. And I want to go back to the person that we started with, Asaph. Remember him? He was the one, like Chad just sung about, he's kicking down the doors. God, why would you allow this? God, why are all these good things happening to these bad people and bad things happening to me? God, where are you? I want you to see what he writes just a few verses later. And hopefully this will be your story today as well, no matter what you're going through. It says this, "When I tried to understand all this, it troubled me deeply till I entered the sanctuary of God. And then I understood their final destiny." And he continues by saying this, "My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever." And that's your God today. He can be your strength and your portion forever, no matter what you are facing today. And so as we end our time together, I want you to just bow your heads for a moment. I know there's so many stories in here today, watching online in Scottsville, and I just want an opportunity just to pray for you no matter what you're facing today. Because I know all of us are going through it, but I know there's some of you that are going through very difficult situations that none of us can understand or comprehend right now. And so if that's you, would you just raise your hand where you're at so I can see you and I can just pray for you today? If you're going through just one of those really tough seasons right now, awesome, wow. Thank y'all for sharing, wow. Thanks for being real. Wow. We as a church would love to lift you up for just a moment. And so let's pray for our own struggles, but let's also pray for the struggles of people right around us who are going through things that we do not know. Let's ask God just to be with us this week as we leave here today. Jesus, I thank you so much for what you did for us on the cross. God, the suffering and the pain that you went through, God, to prove to us just how much you love us is inexpressible to contain or to understand. But God, I know today, even though we know that about you, God, we also have our pain and struggle here on this earth that is so hard to reconcile and deal with. And so, God, for every single person in here today that is going through something, that is struggling with something, that is experiencing pain, experiencing suffering, Lord, I lift them up to you. God, I ask that your peace and comfort be in their lives. And as they leave here today, and even as we are praying, God, they would experience your peace in the midst of their problems. And they would cling and lean on a God who understands and can empathize with our pain. And so, Lord, today we choose to trust you and follow you, even when we don't have all the answers. And we give it all to you today and thank you for our time together. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. Can we've got a hand for our time together today? Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. And if you are one of those people that raised your hand today or going through something, I want to let you know our prayer team's going to be on each side of the auditorium here. If you would like somebody to talk to or pray with, they're available. For everybody else, thank you so much for being here. Look forward to next week as we explore our next question. And thank you so much for being here. Have a great Sunday, guys.